Okay. All right. So here we go. We're beginning recording. I hope Kate, I hope you can hear us. I hope Lucia can hear us as well. All right. So I'm going to go. I think I might actually. Can everyone see that? Yeah. Do I need to go to presentation mode, or can I just stay in this? Should I do that? Is that good? Is that better? All right. Okay. So if I hear a bleep from the join me thing, then I might go out of this just to let someone else in. But all right. So I think this is going to be the format today, where who is ever presenting can just sit here at the front and kind of just go through their slides right on the computer. So everyone knows all this scenario with the stations, the standard setup. Jim's going to talk to us today in his presentation about some of his own sort of custom stuff that he's done here on site. But everyone knows our standard setup here. So this is the agenda for today. So updates, I'm going to go through. We'll have a little break, and then we'll just get right into the presentations. I think what we should do is just have discussion during the presentations as needed. It doesn't have to be a formal kind of thing where we get through every presentation before we take questions. We'll have a lunch, just bagged lunch. We can have that however we want. We can eat outside. I assume, Jim, people can roam around at lunch and whatever. They can roam wherever they want. Do whatever. We can continue discussions if we want. We can break out into little groups, whatever. And then we'll just get back into presentations in the afternoon. We'll have a break, and then, we've just got time in the afternoon to just continue discussions. This is the intention of this is, talking about the stations, networking, just, asking questions, looking for support, planning for the future, whatever seems appropriate. Okay, and then as everyone knows, we have the float trip at the end. So there's you gone, Bullard?
I have to go run samples.
Yes. Yes. The lab man. So, and Jim has canoes and kayaks down there.
5 canoes and 4 kayaks.
So we're fine. If people want to wing it and stay and they didn't intend to, that's perfectly fine. We should be good to go. Okay. So these are the updates that I'm going to go through. I'm just going to sort of go through the basics and just kind of, it'll be just kind of a review of resources and stuff. And I'll give some updates on 4G LTE progress that Shannon is making. That is actually seems to be something that is going to be happening within the year. So that's going to be a pretty big change, 4G LTE. So that pretty much means that a lot of these stations that are currently offline are going to be able to be online. Now, Kent, who was going to be here today, he couldn't be here because of a sick kid. He's out in Manor, and for whatever reason, Shannon says that she still doesn't get even 4G connection out there. So poor Kent still isn't going to get to be online, apparently.
Does that mean 2G will still work, or won't?
Well, if 2G still works, then it'll work.
Right.
Yeah, okay. And we're not going to be switching. If 2G is still fine, then there's no need to even switch. It'll just be the ones that have either gone offline, with 2G being phased out, or the ones that have never been online. So then we're working with Master Watershed Stewards. We have a couple of those folks here today, or at least one, George. We're working with them to facilitate support on general maintenance and upkeep of the stations across the basin. We're going to be doing full suite sampling this summer, completing some of the grab samples that we weren't able to get when we deployed the stations because of high flow conditions. Basically, full suite meaning I'll go through the different parameters, but that's sort of the base level assessment of chemistry at base flow. So as we know, we put these stations in at times in high watt or higher water, and we didn't collect full suite samples at that time. So Matt's going to be sort of leading that field effort, Matt Kasandi. We're going to continue to do storm sampling. Shroud is going to move a little more in that direction, hopefully this summer, with providing support. Matt's also going to be going out to support that effort. And then just going to talk a little bit about a possible bigger workshop in the winter. That should say February of 2020, where this is today, it's, you know, maybe a little bit of a pilot for that, where we'll be gathering folks from across the basin as well as outside of the basin, as well as folks, it'll be an invite to folks who aren't necessarily even involved with sensor stations, so they can sort of maybe get a little bit more in the loop. It'll also be a lot, hopefully will be, or presumably will be, some folks like who have been doing stuff like Jim with their own sort of DIY type stuff. And then I'm just going to talk briefly about the future workshops that we have coming up this year. Okay, so I'll just get right into it. So there's our current distribution. Hopefully a lot of those gray and red sites will become green again this year with the 4G capacity being built. LTE, I guess, is the proper, if we're talking about it proper. And that may have been, that actually may be a little bit outdated, because I think we've actually, I think there may be a few.
What's the difference between the green and the red?
So the red is ones that have stopped transmitting, basically, or don't have data for, I don't know, 2 months or something like that. There's a legend on the monitor, and we can get into that. The green are active. The gray are just not online. They're there, but they're not online. So hopefully, so the red are, for instance, these ones that used to get 2G, such as Ryan Newman's on Jenkintown. And it, you know, with this sort of, with these towers, with them putting in new equipment, they basically have been taking out 2G equipment. And so some of these sites that used to have 2G have been going offline. So that's why Shannon has finally been able to, and been given direction to proceed with spending a good amount of time on just, you know, the engineering of this 4G thing. And we all know Shannon Hicks, and she has a lot of, you know, engineering skills, and, you know, so she's been really hammering on that lately and making a lot of progress. So we're pretty happy about that.
They're not transmitting. Are they still collecting? They're still collecting.
They're still collecting. They're all still collecting the SD card, and so that's another. You know, get into that with when we talk about monitor. But, you know, with monitor, My Watershed, the idea there, and, you know, the idea, it's not totally functional yet. It's sort of in a state of transition, in that it was moved from Utah State to Limnotech, and they're sort of trying to iron it out and get a good foundation right now for that. But the idea with that is that not only data, that real-time data gets streamed to monitor, but that there is a capacity to upload data from stations that are not online. And then at that point, it's just the data become online. They're not real-time, but they're online, and they're graphable, and you can do all of the other functions, comparing to other sites and overlaying parameters and such. So just a layout of the folks that are involved with Shroud here, and actually I'm just going to go in here, and I should really just say Dave R. Scott, John Jackson, and Matt Earhart, the original SIT-SCI project designers. So, and they basically just passed it off to me to just sort of, you know, Dave is the executive director, John Jackson is senior scientist, and Matt Earhart is director of restoration.
So with 4G, that's a lot of bandwidth. Any thoughts of adding a camera to any of these?
Wait, say that again?
So 4G is plenty of bandwidth.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts of maybe adding a camera to some of these sites?
There's certainly been thoughts.
Takes a lot more power.
You know, there's that power thing, I mean, you know, ideally Shannon has a lot of time to just be doing that type of stuff. People are spread pretty thin, but, you know, certainly there's opportunity for people to DIY this stuff, you know. So I don't know. I mean, maybe that's a conversation you could start having with folks, that, you know, anyone that you think might be able to sort of really, you know, make progress on that type of thing.
It might be useful to keep an eye on the sensors themselves, make sure they don't have stuff piled up on them.
Well, oh, so you're talking about just associating a camera, just not building that into the actual station, but having that as sort of a separate thing. I mean, certainly we could, you know, that would definitely be something that would be useful in terms of just documenting on-site conditions. Having a picture of flow.
Every 10 minutes.
Getting pictures of vandals, human or animal.
Somehow,
you know.
Yeah, weather conditions.
Yeah.
Other stuff. So somehow, maybe every 30 minutes or something.
I mean, that would be a great thing to do at both those Pickering sites, you know, because those are both the Montgomery one is associated with, you know, or the upstream one is associated with the school, downstream one is associated with the YMCA. So those would certainly be good opportunities, I think, for those organizations there too.
Would that include something like a self-cooking rain bucket too? Because when I tried to add that last year, it was one or the other. You couldn't do both on the current setup.
On adding it to the station?
Right.
Well, I don't know. I mean, you know, I mean, you could certainly put up a separate one. I mean, tying it into the same station, that could be done, but, you know, that's...
It's a whole engineering project.
It's a whole other engineering project, and that, you know, I think it really just comes to the time, a standalone system, right? You could put a standalone system right alongside.
That's what we did with the geosensors. We just sync it to take readings at the same time, and then we just have to go and upload it and then add it to our data set, which is kind of next, but it's what.
Yeah, and you got DO sensors that are, well, you got granted DO sensors, and they're a lot cheaper, I think, than the sensors that Shroud, that Shannon is. Right.
And via post. So you manually upload. Yeah. Okay.
So, you know, we have this core group set up. We have a good number of the core group folks here. This is not necessarily super formal, but it's just kind of the folks that have a lot of stations out and are, you know, have been involved. This is some of the original folks that kind of were involved from back in 2017. So we've got the Shroud folks, Carol Armstrong, who's not here. She has been mentoring George Seeds, who is here today, and their mentorship sort of scenario has been a pilot, has been serving as a pilot for how we're going to be training the rest of the Penn State Master Watershed stewards this summer, where we're going to have a big training, and then we're going to pair trainees up with mentors. So Nancy Lawler, also, who's not here, she's a little bit too far away. She works closely with Cole Baldino. They're both up in northern New Jersey. Krista Reeves, who is here today, wears multiple hats. Krista has just graduated from East Stroudsburg University. Her advisor was Paul Wilson, who's also here today. Krista also works with Musconetcong Watershed Association, and she also is a Shroud part-time technician who basically works and facilitates field work in the northern part of the Delaware Basin for Shroud.
Krista was here?
Krista is right there. Krista. Krista Reeves. So Paul is here today, professor at East Stroudsburg University. Kim, Nature Conservancy, Delaware. She has 6 stations out monitoring water that's coming into the First State National Historic Park. She's managing a pretty all-star group of volunteers there, stream stewards, they call themselves. Kim is here. Raise your hand, Kim.
Yeah. Oh.
there. And Chuck Wagner is here. Both of them are presenting today. Chuck has an interesting scenario that he's been working on that he's going to talk about. Steve Tuerto, he is in New Jersey, maybe a little far away to come today. He's also super busy. Has a new role relatively new role as Director of Science at the Watershed Institute. They've been doing some DIY stuff themselves. They've been working on building the station themselves. Lauren is also here today, Lauren McGrath at Willistown. She also is sort of in a new role as, what's your official title, Lauren?
That's the Director of the Watershed Protection Program.
Okay, at Willistown Conservation Trust. So they are a land trust, and they just now have this new sort of science-oriented group that Lauren is leading. And then Kent Himmelwright, who is with Berks County Conservation District. He's like the watershed specialist or something to that effect. Kent was going to be here today, but he has a sick child at home, so he had to stay home to work with that. Kent is in the same office as Kent is in the Berks Ag Center, which is where the Master Watershed Stewards training is going to be this summer, and they are putting in a station there on a named tributary to Plum Run. So just to move on, so just to review basic field work with regard to these stations. If nothing else, the recommendation is to go out and maintain sensors bi-weekly. Bi-weekly is a pretty heavy lift at times. That is acknowledged. You know, bi-weekly to monthly. Really ideal is bi-weekly because these sensors, particularly the turbidity, do foul. But I'm going to show some plots here a little later that do show that the CTD does need to be cleaned. It does foul and it does throw conductivity off pretty substantially. Not the end of the world, and it can go a pretty long time without cleaning, but you know, if we're doing it if you're really trying to do it proper, you know, you really do want to clean the CTD on a regular basis as well. And it
bi-weekly is every 2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks, and maybe I should change that. Every 2 weeks. There.
Yeah, actually, sure.
Okay, so okay, so I guess we're still good there. Okay, so good. Thank you, George. Okay, so with that, just getting down to the basics of it, cleaning the sensors, cleaning around the logger, you know, making sure that vegetation isn't growing up the pole and allowing for connection of vegetation where ants can crawl in. And, you know, they're going to be able to crawl up the pole anyways, but you want to just sort of try to minimize the amount of vegetation that's covering that thing up. Introducing water, possibly covering up the solar panel. Completing a field visit data sheet. Other observation, taking photos. We have a photo sharing Google Drive now that I'll introduce. That's on the online group. And then entering the data online. So this, you know, completing a data sheet and entering the data online are pretty, you know, they may not be important to the local situation because you may have your hands on it and you may know exactly what's going on. But in terms of this data set being a publicly available data set that whoever wants to can go in there and use the data, you know, when you're doing that, you want to know when sensors were cleaned. Okay, this observation, this spike happened this time. Is there something in the data sheets that can tell me what was going on there? Or sensors were changed or were moved at this point in time or whatever. All that type of quality control, all that type of information is good to have in there that describes your site visits. Metadata, proper metadata.
So field visit data sheet and online, but I thought was that an either or? You have to do both.
Well, you know,
Means writing something down.
if you want to write your information down in a field notebook and then go back and enter it into the data form, that's, you know, we're not collecting copies of the hard copy data sheets. You know, that's just, I think, beyond the scope of what we're, you know, doing at this point. I mean, we could do that at some point, but, you know, this is sort of a volunteer, you know, people are volunteering to be a part of this. So, you know, it's just sort of what we recommend, and then people do what they can do. The idea with the data sheet, though, is that when you go out with a notebook, you don't have categories in there that you can just go down and check off and fill in. You have to remember, okay, did I do this? Did I do this? Did I do this? Did I clean the sensors? Okay, did I remember to write down when I cleaned them? You know, did I do the quality control test? Okay, yes, I did, but did I write the time down? All that information is on the data sheet. The data sheet is a little dense, and we've gotten feedback from folks like Krista that, you know, it's a little bit hard to work with. You know, I know Krista is fine with it now. So you do, it does just, you know, you have to get in there and understand the data sheet. But that said, there may be a point where we do revise the data sheet based on feedback. You know, on the online group, you know, if someone wants to start a topic in the forum, you know, about the data sheet and giving feedback on the data sheet, that's certainly something that anyone is welcome to do, starting a forum topic for particular, you know, areas of discussion.
Hey, are you telling us that the data sheet is really only kind of a super field notebook?
Yes. Yes. And, you know, in terms of these big projects that go on, you know, EPA projects, state level projects, very rarely are people filling stuff out in a field notebook. There's a standard data sheet so that the data being collected are consistent and standardized. Field notebooks are really only used, to my knowledge, when it's an academic or something who's going out and doing their own individual project, or something like Dave and Marion are doing. You know, they're doing their own thing, and they don't have to be sharing their data. They have all control over their data, you know. So that's when the field notebook is perfectly fine, because it's just yours. But when you're sharing all this information and you're trying to sort of make sure that every bit of information is recorded so that it, you know, can support the broader data set and the metadata compilation effort, that's where you get into just using a data sheet so that it's a standardized process.
And Dave, so in entering the data online, what you're talking about there is there's like a template which kind of mirrors.
Exactly. It's the online form, which is this, you know, and we can go into that. We probably don't want to go into that right now, but there's a link at the top of the data sheet, and we have data sheets there that people can grab. They're on Right in the Rain, so you can grab those. I printed out 50 of them. You can grab those, and then there's a pass, RWI, and you go in there, and there's a tab to enter data, and then there's a tab to view data. So you can view all the rest of the data in a spreadsheet. At that point, you filter the spreadsheet and whatever. There's two actual links to previous data that were recorded on a previous version of the data sheet, and then the current spreadsheet, which is based on the present data sheet, present format of the data sheet.
I haven't started a topic. I would love to just have an Excel spreadsheet, or at least something that looked like an Excel spreadsheet, just fill in the fields, because that's
I know.
what everyone puts me to sleep.
I know, but you're a scientist. You come from a long history of data, and the feedback I've gotten from the data people at Shroud is that when they've tried to do that, they get mistakes. So,
I thought an option.
Well, that's a perfect idea. That's a perfect thing to talk about here. And okay, so one thing Matt is documenting right now. So Matt is taking notes. So this is a meeting. So as these user groups go along, we started a cumulative notes Google Doc, and I shared that with the core group folks. So anyone else can be taking notes in that, you know, as we go through here. But that's the type of thing that is intended that we have this time and space to talk about.
So quarterly data is a long list of stuff for that. and it's just going through and trying to add field by field. In the annual data, there's like, I think 25 analyst parameters. So there was a spreadsheet rather than trying to put it would take
I know, it would take less time. 100.
Well, I already have it in the spreadsheet, so all I would
It doesn't take that long to use the form, does it?
It's not like I have.
I guess it varies from person to person, but it's a valid point because it does take longer to enter it into the form than directly into a spreadsheet. It's a form. It's a form.
But it has a spreadsheet.
It has a spreadsheet associated with it, but you can't enter data directly into that spreadsheet. The form takes the data and puts it into that spreadsheet, but you cannot go in and edit that spreadsheet. You can filter and this and that, but you can't edit. So you can copy it out, you know, and work with the data in a regular spreadsheet at that point. But it's a valid point that Mike Bullard made.
You talked about before, whatever way you do it, the first thing would be to just cleaned it. I mean, a lot of the trips out, especially like a carrier, like when I cleaned off the solar panel, I ripped whatever junk was away from the thing, and I cleaned it. That's it. I didn't do anything more than that.
Take a picture of the gauge and
Exactly. So going down the thing, okay, that's here, this is down here.
Exactly.
You know, and
And that maybe is just, you know, that's maybe just the next round of, you know, data sheets and data entry where we can do some sort of revision like that is more accommodating. Because presumably, you know, I think we're looking at this in the long term where this could be, you know, well, we could be having the same types of meetings 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now.
you might have time to say, oh, I'm not putting in all the times I clean it, not going in every week. It's you know,
and it doesn't have, you know, if the data are recorded, if you have the data, it doesn't have to be entered right after. Ideally, that's the case, but it doesn't have to be, you know. No, we all are. We all are.
But to go back to the point, the only problem I have with this data sheet is the constant changing of the time. Sometimes it's military time, then
Well,
you're asking for EST, EDT, why don't we just standardize that?
Well, it's because
I think that
it was the data sheet was designed for the Dream Hoster site. And when you're taking data off the Dream Hoster site, it's always in 24-hour EST. So the idea with that was that if you're taking off the data, that you're just recording the data, recording the time as you see it, as opposed to having to do a correction, you know. So the idea is for someone to just be able to record the time as it is seen on the site, which is why it's always EST for the sensor data on the data sheet. But if we ever fully move to monitor My Watershed, then that's when this data sheet is going to become more obsolete, because the monitor is presumably going to be displaying data according to the correct regional and, you know, seasonal time.
Ooh. Well, at least amend the form to say EST parentheses UTC -5, something like that.
Okay, so note that, Matt. And, you know, monitor, up until now, you know, monitor is kind of in a state of transition, but the idea there was initially they were just going to keep it in UTC. And then it's like, as someone goes in there, and then it's like, well, what? All right, so you've got to go take -5 or whatever, and then you've also got to adjust for, is it Eastern, is it daylight or savings? And then by that time, people's head, you know, brain is spinning.
Well,
so hopefully on monitor, they correct it for the current regional time.
You've got people from all different levels of understanding of this issue, at least be a mini graphic. Something that says UTC, EST is UTC -5, EDT is UTC -4.
You mean when we go to monitor?
On the paper, so that people can learn that. Because it's...
Well, and that's a great point, and we set this data sheet up so that it kind of, you know, would, as best as possible, walk a person through the data sheet without even needing to refer to a manual. You know, a lot of times these data sheets are set up without any guidance on them, and you refer to the manual to actually understand what's being collected. We tried to put in descriptions in here about like the different parameters that you're collecting. So what you're saying, Mike, is just a continuation of that, and I think that's also a great point. So quality control is the other requested thing to do at these stations. Again, this is just for proper metadata. These stations really are pretty reliable. I mean, Shannon has done an awesome job with, you know, building a system that is resilient and very reliable. Nonetheless, sometimes you do get sensors that fail. You guys have had a lemon before, right? Yeah. Marion and Dave have had lemons. Every now and again there are lemons. There's also the cleaning issue, you know, where you see issues with cleaning. But again, it's just proper metadata. So if someone uses the continuous data, there are records that confirm, you know, at least a second check that the station data are accurate.
So, question: I have the HANA turbidity, you know, EC and temperature. Yeah. But the turbidity, do you have a recommendation for that? Or do you think everybody going to a station should have one? Or
you know, well,
they're fairly inexpensive, I thought.
I mean, Bullard has prepared one QC kit that is out. Kim's group has that. The Delaware Nature Conservancy has that right now. He's preparing a second one, and that does have a turbidity sensor.
The target?
His is a Hawk?
It's a regular EPA-approved professional machine.
Yeah.
Not cheap.
With a cuvette.
Yeah.
That's about $1,000, right?
The current models are, but for now, this is 2 models back, and they show up on eBay basically new for about $100 every once in a while. So
for about $100, okay.
There's one.
So eBay is okay. So that's a good note to have.
But I'm thinking of one with a target. You know,
so
the target.
You can certainly use that.
Yeah.
As long as you know, Jim's talking about the turbidity tube. You can certainly use that. You know, as long as you document that's how you did it. It's at least some sort of check. Now, the one really important point here is that these turbidity sensors, as far as I can tell, and Marion has data to speak to this, but depending on the manufacturer, they don't necessarily get that consistent a reading. And it depends on how well they read different particle sizes and this type of thing. Some, for instance, might read sand particles better than others. So the point is, that is the point of developing a local and station or system-specific turbidity to TSS rating curve. So that whatever your turbidity data are, it's associated with actual measured quantity of sediment in a sample. So that's the reason for doing the turbidity to TSS curve, so that you actually can then, excuse me, infer suspended sediment concentrations based on your turbidity data. Okay? It certainly is going to be useful over time to have more and more information that compares turbidity sensors as well as conductivity sensors. Conductivity is pretty easy and most sensors are pretty good at it, but, you know, a side project we could do, you know, if people were interested, you know, it would be a good project for volunteers to do. It's just getting a set of different handheld conductivity sensors and just comparing them with a standard. Yes.
They do that kind of work at the alarm program that they present. Like that's exactly what they do.
So we should. Yeah, and so I've seen they've had a few of them, and I don't know. I mean, maybe that would be something that we could post to the online group. I mean, that'd be great. I vaguely remember seeing that a couple months ago, and thinking that was a really good start. I think they'd had a couple sensors that they compared. And I can't even remember what they showed, But, Marianne?
I think the only thing that's ever going to really work is if a local group has to have their own set of connectivity standards or turbidity standards. You buy these things, they're kind of pricey, but you keep these things, you read the literature very carefully to make sure that they, both connectivity and no issue, turbidity standards have an issue of the little particles in there agglomerating and so on, so they're good for, have a finite lifetime, and you actually have to run whatever piece of equipment versus a series of standards that give you some sort of idea about what the linearity is and so on. So you generate a calibration curve. And you got to do that periodically because, heaven help us, they do drift. Even sitting on the shelf, not turned on, next time you turn it on, it may not be quite right. So you got to check it periodically. I don't know that, I'm not talking about comparing instrument to instrument, but whatever it is, it's exactly what you said. You got to have your own set of standards that you run yourself, and you use that to correlate opposite TSS or whatever you want to have.
And that's
everybody's here, right? It would be great. So it's really easy to mix up a lot of a connectivity standard with the certified traceable KPL. And we actually participate in national efficiency testing, so we know our connectivity stuff is, well, we think it's good. Same with the turbidity. I take a 4,000 and I dilute it down, but the 4,000 goes off just like that. It's worth up shelf life of a year or something like that. So, but we can make an awful lot of calibration check standards. Yep. And it would be easy to ship that out on, say, every 2 months or something. One way, just to people who are interested in at least in connectivity standard that's good, and a turbidity standard that's still fresh.
And if you're talking field meter, I would suggest calibrating. I calibrate pretty much every time before I go out. At least once a week. I mean, if we're going out a bunch of times, maybe once a week. And I often will take something out with me into the field.
Calibrate daily.
Yeah, anytime I'm saying it's kind of minimum. And then also I take a standard out in the field with me. So if something, I test it, it's like, could be whatever. And
so this is the challenge. The challenge with all this is that it takes time. And as we know, most of the groups that are in this, realm are spread pretty thin with professionals and volunteers. So, that's part of the idea with getting the master watershed stewards involved is to get more people on board that can do specific things, going out and doing QC or whatever.
So, Paul, when you're talking about standards in the field, you're talking about conductivity or
turbidity or whatever you've got.
So what is it? I'm familiar with the conductivity standard, fluid, yeah. But what's the turbidity
standard?
standard?
The thing basically is supposed to mimic the cloudiness of the water. So in other words, you have a 10 NGU standard, the same way as you would measure it in the field. So you have 10, 100, 1,000, whatever it is that you happen to be using. And so in addition to calibrating before I go out, I'll often at least take one with me that's in the range of what I expect to be sampling, and then I can test that in the field before I test the water. And if it's supposed to be a 10 NGU standard and I get 10, I'm feeling pretty good. If I get 20, something's wrong.
But no, so the CTD standard, current, our water sensor, can you dip in there?
Oh, you could. Sorry, I'm talking about the field meter to go out to test that one. So I'm talking about taking something out to the field and making those measurements, which I'm then comparing to the readings I'm getting from the one. I'm not necessarily pulling the sensors out of the station all the time.
Okay, but if you have a sensor, you have a reading from the CTD sensor, and then if you sample that water right on site, then you say...
Should be the same.
Okay.
Or again, if there's a slight error between the two of them and it's off by 2 all the time, if it's a consistent error, I'm not...
Yeah, and that's what Marion's talking about just knowing if there is an offset, with this.
Right.
Then okay, even temperature. With our QC kits that we're preparing, we're putting in some pretty high-end temperature thermometers, temperature sensors, so that we can really, because when you're talking about temperature, you want to be pretty on with that. What?
Well, another complication I shouldn't even mention is that And I assume that the CTD sensor does the temperature correction internally.
It does.
But, okay. But, you know, you do have to worry about conductivity. It does change substantially as the temperature goes down, so.
Yeah, it does.
And so that really then you need to look at the data that you have for the conductivity that's measured in the stream, assume and you need to run your conductivity either at, specific conductivity is supposed to be run at 25 degrees centigrade, but there are plenty of tables around that help you get very close to what that specific conductivity is when you measure your standard in the lab, and you need to know whether your probe has a built-in correction into it also. So you kind of get up chasing your tail there on this thing. But
you really can.
You got to be really
can.
I'm kind of familiar with what your equipment is doing. Is it correcting or is it not? And so on.
But you said the CTDs do correct for 25, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Should
So
they?
And most of these handhelds do as well.
Yeah, they do. The HANA does.
Okay, so how are we doing on time? What time is it?
10 o'clock.
2 o'clock.
Oh, you want that in DST or standard?
All right, it's 10 o'clock. Okay, so we should probably get moving. I mean, we've got time, I think, but just to allow plenty of time for folks to, get home and spend time with their presentations and whatever. So here's the data sheet. These are the two sections in red for basic maintenance. This is, Paul, this is what you were talking about. It's just these two sections that you need to fill out for basic maintenance. The header information, the specific sensor information, and then anything else that you get here in the other sensor maintenance category. And then enter it into the online link there. And then here's the QC. Note that you're cleaning the sensors before you're QCing. I almost went out to this. We were at the Pike Creek Station in northern Delaware, associated with the Independent School, and I was not thinking straight, and I went and did the QC before we had cleaned the sensors, and then cleaned the sensors, and that's the data I'm going to show. The conductivity jumped 60 points after cleaning.
Went up or down?
Up.
Really?
Yeah.
Because here, Marcy, always goes down.
I think it went up. We'll get to the data. We'll get to the data. I can't remember if it went up or down. Exactly. It's those little, so everyone knows it's those 4 little screws in the sensor.
Oh, you said conductivity. I'm sorry.
The conductivity.
Turbidity.
Oh, the turbidity. Yeah. No, the conductivity.
Okay.
But that was the point. Everyone knows the turbidity valve.
Yeah.
But, I think there's an assumption among folks that conductivity doesn't, but it really does. And it doesn't foul nearly as easy, but it does. It does foul. So there's, with the QC, there's filling out the header information, there's the cleaning of the sensors, there's the depth quality control, there's the chemistry quality control, and then there's the data download. This is part of the data sheet. It could be formatted a little more clearly because this is one sort of random QC spot. Now, everything that's QC here is in italics. So anything that is related to QC, the header information has italics. So there's recommended frequency quarterly. Okay, recommended frequency quarterly. But even if a station is online, the idea is to still download the data on a quarterly basis just to be sure. There's a slight time difference between the online data and the SD card data as well. Yeah, I don't really think it's anything that is like going to majorly affect something. You never know, which is why we've set up this Google sharing drive to share all the SD card data as a repository for all of the, the very most reliable data.
It can't be more than 5 minutes.
It's
It can't be as much as 5 minutes because of the way the
correct.
intervals are.
Correct. It's just that's why I say it's just a short bit of time.
Well, what happens
But nonetheless, it is.
If you look at that software, what it does at first is it actually collects the data, it logs it to the card,
right,
and then it tries to make the connection to the internet.
Right. Right.
And so it has to be complete. You'll notice it in the log if you start, but in the online data, it started missing because it took more than 5 minutes. But I can't remember whether there's a timeout on that or not.
It keeps trying, and that's why it'll wear down the battery too. It'll keep trying to send. And I don't know I can't remember if there's a certain point where it does automatically stop, but it.
Would that explain the battery suddenly dropping?
It can. I mean, there's lots of things to explain the battery dropping, but you mean very quickly?
Very quickly.
That very quickly thing, I think, can be a remnant of some, Shannon, her last explanation, it was just her like, don't worry about it. It's some artifact of the board or something, and I wish she was here, but she has her kids right now, and I think that's what she's doing. But regardless, just to emphasize the online group, it's not, it's a little, people have issues with logging in and stuff, but if you get familiar with it, it is a resource to pose this type of question. Shannon and Rachel and others, you guys check it, right? The online group. So that's certainly an opportunity to pose these types of things to the broader group, and then it's on record, beyond just an email chain.
But the data that's logged to the SD card uses the Mayfly internal clock.
Correct.
Reasonably accurate.
That's that should be super accurate.
It's not a GPS clock.
Okay, sorry. I'm thinking about it 100%.
So here's this, and I should have put in here where this is from. This is Pike Creek
Independence, right?
Independence School, but I can't remember the logger number or the site ID. I just did this morning. Regardless, let me go back to, so these are the numbers before I cleaned. Pike. Okay. So, depth 239.7, thereabouts. Conductivity 200, temp 20.9. So then all I did was shift it. And you see even depth changed. It's not very major, but it did change, about 5 millimeters. Conductivity changed pretty substantially.
Was that just sediment? Or was there actually, bigger debris in there?
I mean, maybe it's just a little bit of buildup on the thing that prevents it from fully sensing the pressure, I guess. I mean.
It does solve the same thing down to each area, actually. And again,
with depth?
With depth as well, exactly like that kind of being depth. And I can't say because it's kind of going blind. It's one of these, all right, there it is, scrub. But yeah, it's all close. I was wondering if that feeling. Yeah.
So, just some points with being delicate with these things. You want to use some fairly soft bristles for the CTD sensor. You want to get those soft bristles into that little slot. But you want to make super sure that, you're being gentle and not, because that pressure transducer is somewhat sensitive. Yeah, Kim?
No, I feel like I've originally heard Shannon say, don't worry, you can't hurt these things. Just give it a good hard scrub. So now I'm worried.
Well, it's just the pressure transducer.
Isn't that diaphragm reset?
And it is. Yeah.
And connectivity is down below.
Correct.
So you really can't get at the diaphragm.
Yeah.
She found out through trial and error that they are so easy to break.
So you shouldn't be trying to actually get the bristles into that.
No, you do want to get them in because you have to clean those screw heads. You have to clean those screw heads. So Jim's going to do a diagram of the CTD sensor.
Yes. Brush that we all have those that throw bristles. I'm like, that's perfect for getting into CTD spot. That's what I want to pull it. I just want to make sure.
The long bristles, the long softer bristles. You don't want to put the stiff gray bristles inside the slot.
This is the diaphragm, which is actually recessed, and then you see a little slot, and the connectivity is down here. That's pretty rough. And this is the diaphragm. You don't want to.
Are you
So here's the CTD sensor. Here's the slot, right? Everyone knows that slot. The pressure transducer is right there. The 4 screw heads are right there.
Right.
That's the conductivity.
But anyway.
Huh?
It's a little, those screw heads are a little bit lower on that slot. They're really down at the very bottom of it.
But they're not delicate. They're little.
Yes.
I would like to add that when we have to clean that sensor, one of the things we do is just take that stem off the post that it's on and sort of switch it around. We had one sensor on each run that would get a lot of, you have a big storm and it would put a lot of grit and everything else. And when you slosh this thing around, you get most of it out without ever putting that, before you ever put the brush up. The other thing is sometimes a leaf fragment would fall out of there, a little tiny thing, half the size of a dime, and I suspect something like that can affect that diaphragm enough to cause that kind of shit.
Yeah, and we've seen like little rocks get in there and push up against that diaphragm and affect depth. So that's a good point that, you know, generally when we're putting these out, you know, Shannon and Rachel generally recommend, well, you don't really need to take the pin out and remove the bundle very often. However, you see someone like Marion who has a particular scenario where he's found that actually removing the bundle can really be effective and you can clean a lot better that way.
But actually, a comment on that pin, because I tried to clean my fence in the middle of winter, and there was no way I was going to.
No, and that's why you don't want to just flippantly do that if the water's super cold and you don't have gloves or whatever, because that pin can be tough to kind of get back through the holes and can actually be tough to even close at times.
But no, I was going to comment on it.
Wait, a tip on that. 2 things that you should do. When you take that pin out, have a file with you in the field, and because when they make that thing, they do it with a thing that's a shear cutter, and it is sort of, they have a ragged edge on it.
Oh,
So you just want to point that. Just that will have a big impact. The other thing is carry a nail with you. You'll find a nail is if you're trying to slide this thing up and down, and you know about where the hole is. Have this nail, it'll go through there, and you say, okay, hold it still and pull it out and put the pin in.
Well, my solution is even easier, because George, you saw my arrangement?
Yeah.
You just lift it out of the water. No pin, no nothing. Just lift it out, and I can clean it, put it back on again. And because I have a cap on the tube, which puts it right exactly the same level when I drop it back on, and the flex pipe keeps the thing oriented.
Better way to do it.
Do you have the notes open? Can you help Matt? Can you help Matt with taking notes?
You could just do that with a hose clamp.
I'm just saying, like, Krista can help with notes, maybe. There's a lot of good information going on here. Or Lauren. No, you don't have a computer.
The screw cap on top.
Okay. Better move on. But no change in temperature with the cleaning. Just as a reminder, you know, there's 2 manuals. There's the DRWI one, which is just an operations manual. That's sort of the one that is, you know, talks about some of the more detailed stuff with the grab samples and that type of thing. That's the Google Doc, and then there's the extensive manual, which is on the Enviro DIY page, which goes from building all the way up through coding and installation.
I've got to hand it to whoever wrote this. These are very good documents, very thorough.
Well, it was collaborative. It was me and Rachel and Scott Ensign and Shannon helped and Matt helped. Matt Gisandi, who's here, is the only other Shroud person here today. Rachel couldn't be here as well.
Yeah, I agree. Just as a newcomer to all this, I'm learning it.
Well, and this manual here is, you can comment in that too. So, you know, certainly you can give feedback. What are you guys talking about?
I'm taking my own notes.
Oh, I shared that document with you. I shared the cumulative notes with you. So open that, and you should be able to just put it into there.
Yeah, just the agenda. Okay.
No, not the agenda. Hold on. This. Krista. So it should come up on your email right now. Everyone saw the Wi-Fi here, right? You're on Wi-Fi, Krista? Okay. All right, just some logistics here. All right, let me check join me and make sure we're okay there. Okay, it's fine. We're still recording. Okay, so moving on, we're at the hour point now, so let's get through. Okay, so we've been preparing videos to sort of as supplement to the manual, because some folks, you know, folks that show up at this type of meeting seem to be pretty good with using the manual, but others, you know, the manual is pretty dense, and you know, it doesn't. You have to sort of search it, and there may be some information, subtle information included in the manual that is easier to access via videos. So Matt and Rachel Johnson and Krista helped with this installation one. Krista's voice is on it, and she was really a real main person on preparing this installation video. So that is completed, and that's on the Enviro DIY site. That's a step-by-step. There's 5 different sections, and that's the installation process. Ideally, we have videos that go from the very beginning of building the station all the way through programming to installation to maintenance and upkeep and the whole process. But you know, that's a process. So right now we're working on sensor cleaning videos, data download videos, some of the basic stuff to just facilitate volunteer involvement. Sensor bundle removal, and Matt's been doing some videos that are just screen videos where he walks through the process of using this basic discharge calculator, staged area predictor, and load calculator. So that's just an FYI. Monitor My Watershed. So everyone should know this is on the online group. You can access any site publicly. You don't have to have any login or anything to access the site or to access the data or do anything with the data that anyone else can't do. The login only allows you to adjust some of the sort of labels and information that is associated with that site. Okay, so login is generally just like first name, initial, and last name, and then the default pass is just Shroud 970. So that spreadsheet is in the online group, but that I just thought, well, you know, I think it's I don't think anyone's worried about people going in.
So if it's the backup, what is it? Is this the new data portal that you're running?
Monitor My Watershed?
Yeah, but they were changing over to a different data portal.
Well, Dream Hosters.
Right, they're
drwisensors.dreamhosters.com
Right.
is the standard, is the sort of one that is pretty resilient and it's reliable. So that continues to be where the data are going for this for the online data. Now, for a lot of these stations, the online data are also going to monitor. All the stations that are DreamHoster are also going to monitor, okay? But monitor has had, it's in a state of transition. So, you can certainly use it. As you saw, that graph that I just showed was from monitor. So you can certainly use it. But it's just, there's some periods, like it was completely non-functional a couple of weeks ago, where you couldn't even graph data. The point here I'm making is just that for those sites in monitor, you can go in, so your sites, Jim, your 2 Marsh Creek sites, you can go in and log in to Monitor My Watershed with this information, and then go to your sites and whatever, type in additional information associated with the site. So you could go into, for instance, you could go into this section and add in, you could go in here and add in like whatever, add in major watershed, add in subbasin, add in closest town, add in other information about Great Marsh, or the link to Great Marsh or something, or whatever.
Okay. Who's talking?
Somebody didn't mute. Okay, what am I doing here? Okay, so let's go back to this. All right, so moving along. This is just, exactly what you were just talking about, Jim. Limnotech, they are the sort of engineers right now and for the foreseeable future on Monitor My Watershed, working closely with Shroud. It was in the hands of Utah State up until a couple months ago, at which point it was transferred. And so now, at Utah State, it was a sort of a thing where there was a professor and there was graduate students working on it, and so it was sort of a piecemeal type thing. It went well for what it was, but that contract ran out, and now it's more, I think, a longer term type thing where it's going to be in the hands of Limnotech. They are using it for their own internal purposes with their clients and stuff. The person there that we're working with is Anthony Oftenkamp. Anthony was at Shroud for over a decade. And so, Anthony has, they have clients there that they're working with, as well as money from Shroud to be working on the infrastructure for this thing. So it seems like it's going to be becoming more resilient here, hopefully in 2019 and for the long term. Now, it's a developing process. Monitor is not just for sensor stations. It's going to be for leaf pack network. So there's going to be biological sites in there. I was talking to Steve Curlin, the Director of Education at Shroud yesterday. He wants to link the water quality app in to Monitor My Watershed. That's not near term. That's, years.
Question, how is this tied in with Academy of Natural Science? Are we Shroud as sort of a separate island from
well, I mean, this specifically,
the grant, William Penn money.
Well, DRWI,
right.
Going broader than this particular thing, Monitor. I mean, DRWI. This thing we're doing right now is a sort of a DRWI-oriented, Delaware Basin-oriented effort, which certainly involves Academy of Natural Sciences. Lauren Lauren's DO sensors that she got. She leveraged having the Enviro DIY stations to get the Academy to give her DO sensors. So there's certainly these types of things going on. There, you know, a number of groups are collecting samples for DRWI and sending them to ANS. So there's definitely overlap. I mean, in terms of this sensor station network deal, we're not. That's more of a Shroud collaborative with DRWI organizations, as well as organizations that are not necessarily formally involved with DRWI. Primrose Creek Watershed Association, Francis and Larry both here today, you guys have no formal association with Delaware River Watershed Initiative or with even Penn Foundation, right? You know, so we're working with groups in this context, even though we're doing, it's, you know, we're sort of funded with DRWI, we're working with groups that are not directly associated with DRWI, and we're working with them because they're doing good work, they're involved, they're proactive, and their watersheds drain to the Delaware. So that's the broader effort, where this is simply an effort. Secondarily, you know, primarily this is getting these stations to groups to do their own thing, answer their own questions, but secondarily, it's building a data set of continuous data for the Delaware Basin. So their sites are just as good as anyone else's in terms of the broad data set, you know, for streams across the Delaware Basin. So let me just make sure that wasn't someone trying to join. Lost somebody, okay. Guessing it may have been Lucia because she couldn't get, oh no, she's still there. Maybe she's getting audio. Kate, lost Kate. Okay.
Shane Morgan. I know her. Hi, Shane.
Yeah, you know Shane. Everyone knows Shane. She's a mover and a shaker. Okay, so I'll monitor. These are just some of the functions. It's, you know, it lately has not been reliable as dream hosters, but it's much more powerful. You can do custom overlays of different parameters. You can do overlays of different sites, comparing sites across the basin. You know, so you could compare, you could overlay your two sites, conductivity here, conductivity down there, turbidity here, depth, whatever. So we can get into that later if we want to do a little demo. I'm not going to do that now. Online group, you know, just some points to make here. Carol Armstrong, you know, All-Star Carol, goes in there and does weekly reports on all the stations every week. Chuck?
You're going to send all these slides?
Yes. Yes, and this is being recorded as I speak.
Okay.
So that will be shared as well.
Okay.
But these presentations, and if everyone's okay with their personal presentations today, we'll share those too. And we're going to record those as well, if everyone's okay with that.
All right.
I wanted to make sure everyone was okay with that. I sort of just assumed it was, but so I'm putting in regular updates and uploading documents and this and that to the online group. Matt is regularly updating lab results. He just posted full suite lab results that we currently have. He's posting revised rating curves on a regular basis. He posts the updates to the storm sample, grab sample results regularly. Into this uploaded files tab, there's multiple categories in that, and there's a lot of files in there. I think there's like over 100 files. There's a section with just literature in there. So if people want to share literature, you can put literature up there. Mostly what I've posted up there in terms of literature has been stuff that's directly applicable to the sensor station work. You know, there's guidance docs up there. Both those manuals are up there. Different forum topics. The important forum topics are pinned at the top. They're in yellow. And then that's another thing that we can review today if we have time and folks want to do that. So, all right, so getting into 4G and LTE. Shannon is making progress. We ask that you bear with us. This has been going on for a while. I think we're all pretty happy at this point because Shannon has really been given authority to just spend a lot of her time developing this technology. And up until the last several months, that really hadn't been the case. But she's really nailing things down lately and been able to really spend a lot of time on it. And she comes in saying, I was up till 4 a.m. last night. Da-da-da-da. Oh, I worked the weekend. Da-da-da-da.
Question about coverage. Is 4G going to have as good or better coverage than the 2G right now? Right. See,
You mean spatially?
Yeah, I'm basically asking a question
That's the
because
point.
we're marginal on 2G.
Exactly. It does have better spatial coverage.
Okay.
That's why a lot of the stations that have never had coverage will have coverage in the future. So presumably, Egypt and Broad will get coverage, 4G. Now, some don't. Kent Manor Creek still it barely gets even 4G out there. You can't use a cell phone out there hardly.
But I think the real question is 2G going to become obsolete and just disappear?
Well,
or not?
I don't think, I think in certain areas it's probably going to remain just because of probably the cell tower logistics. But it doesn't seem like anyone has really been able to get, because I think these companies are just going out and doing it as they see fit and they're not making it public. I think is pretty much how it's been going. So we don't really know.
So it could all of a sudden disappear, and then we got a lot of work.
And that's why we've been pushing on the 4G, because that is presently happening. Right. That is actually happening right now. Ryan's on the call here today, Ryan Newman in Jenkintown. He did initially have a little bit of 2G coverage at his stations, but now has pretty much none, as I am understanding.
We don't have the carriers done?
You mean like it'll still be through hologram? It is going to be, I put 20 here. Shannon thought that it might be 15, but she said, I really don't know, so don't really, say that definitively.
Hologram 7 a month?
2G was only $5 to $8 a month. So 2G. We sort of just bypassed 3G because there wasn't much better coverage with 3G anyways. Most of the sites that got 3G got 2G anyways. So 4G is the real difference. Where Shannon has been out across, she designed a little detector where she's getting GPS coordinates as she travels and is able to sort of get a map of 4G. And she's finding much, much better, as we see with our phones, it's much better geographic coverage. And proof. So this is actually her current design. So there's an adapter here. You can actually, she said you can attach this B-board directly to the Mayfly, but it doesn't work as well as if you use this little adapter that she designed. So that's it. So this is the little adapter thing, and this is what the boards will look like once we go to 4G. Yeah.
Oh, that's a Zigbee or whatever board?
Yeah, XB, I believe is what it is.
XB.
Yeah. And so this is another thing. This is just sort of a fun thing where Shannon was really happy about this. This is where she gets into her real sort of fun activities. But it has these lights on it for actually like telling you what's going on. So the white light tells you when it's on. The blue status light blinks a different pattern depending on whether it has a valid connection to the network. So that's this one. And then there's the signal strength, which is a brightness thing. Okay? So just a nice little, kind of along the theme of the Mayfly board as a whole, where when she was designing it, she built it so that it had these signal lights in it, so that it would tell the user what was happening on there.
So is it drawing much more power than the current 2G?
As far as I know, no. No, maybe a tiny bit more, but she was pretty happy, as I'm understanding, was pretty happy that it doesn't really draw that much more.
Well,
so it should be fine. So in these,
it's the whole thing sleeps for 5 minutes.
Right. So in these cases where it's a real bad canopy coverage. You know, it might, with the 4G, maybe it would be necessary to go to a bigger battery or something, or a bigger solar panel, you know. But as I'm understanding it, it's not drawing a lot of extra.
So basically, if we go to 4G, we just swap out the extra.
Yes, so when we switch to 4G, Shannon and Rachel are basically going to be doing a tour. As they do with some of these other updates that they've needed to do over the last couple of years. They're just basically going to be doing a tour, and it'll be a prioritized thing where they're going to go to stations that are offline. They're going to go to stations with groups that are actively using the data and are actively maintaining the stations. They're going to a low priority for groups that are not really very active and are sort of just leaving the stations just sit. Which there aren't many groups actually like that. But it'll be a process, you know, and I don't know when that's going to happen.
My homebrew mayflies into it?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I'd like to, because one sense that, well, you've been down there.
Yeah.
It's not an easy trek.
Right, yeah. Okay, so moving on, if there's nothing else no other questions there, why don't we take a break? I'll come back and finish this, and then we can start presentations.
Okay.
So I guess this will be a two-part presentation. I'll stop recording.